23.
They painted this image of me that like I strolled down the streets and stalked young boys and slaughtered them. Hell, if you could see my schedule, my work schedule, you know damn well that I was never out there. I've always told people when I got into clown makeup, I regressed into childhood. It was fun being a clown because you could be yourself or just let yourself go and act a fool. You could be slapstick and funny and have a good time. That's why I always enjoyed clowning. Clowning has taken a bad name because of what they've used in my case.
We gotta get the mask.
Yeah, we got nuisance odor mask, guys.
Yeah. You want
Where was this now? Where are we looking?
huh?
There we go.
Ask Jones to get them for you.
I probably have some of my ET kit, but there's some in the truck.
The head was up underneath this corner here and going back this way.
All right.
The head and feet. There's a piece of cloth down in there, probably pants. They appear to be pants.
No, that's all right. I'm doing fine.
Dan.
Don't worry about it. Really, that's good enough, Dan. We'll get it. This is number 4. Well, let me go get my evidence tape back out here and we'll get it tagged.
What do you got, skull, Dan? Okay. Al?
Yeah.
Al. Over here for skull.
Coming up. You got tissue on there?
That was like a
Rubber band around.
Oh, this is heavy. This is definitely... Elastic. Elastic.
Stuff in there.
Could be stuff in shorts or something. The other one had some type of...
maybe?
Okay, this is second cervical vertebrae.
Cap, why don't you grab your gloves on or something? Give me a hand. You got enough photos right there, or what?
I want to take... If it needs more of a hand, I will.
Want me to rinse it up? Just set it in.
Your Al, or do you want some
Nothing?
No, just about.
All right.
People that go right.
No, I'm doing all right here. Just take your time. You're right, actually, there's nothing.
At this point, I'm pretty sure most of us know what this is. Although the quality is bad, you can literally feel through this broken tape the stench of death that came under the Gacy's home. The infamous crawl space beneath his house, which stored a total of 29 bodies. I guess when you are an insane psychopath like Gacy, you get used to it. Eating dinner with an occasional light breeze of rotting flesh coming through your air vents. You don't even have sleeping problems, knowing that 29 taken lives are lying just a few feet under your bed. It is not hard to say that when it comes to raw, sickening minds, Gacy ranks very high on my list. After all, I'm pretty sure he's very pleased to hear that while he's rotting in hell. It can't get any better for souls who don't have a shred of light. But you wanna know what is the most disturbing thing about this piece of trash? In addition to the fact he continued to show a great deal of disrespect to victims years after they died. He even had the audacity to claim that somebody else actually placed all the bodies under his house. That is some next level shit. In his mind, he was just an ordinary innocent guy who was framed. Let's hear what he thinks about the whole situation.
13 years ago, he told the police how he murdered his victims. Now he's telling me he never did.
People don't want to know the truth and the honesty of it. If they want to be convinced or brainwashed into what they believe, then fine, then go ahead and kill me. But vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because you will have executed somebody that didn't commit the crime.
Those are the words of John Wayne Gacy, pleading innocence from death row at Menard State Penitentiary 13 years after being convicted of his crimes. The most notorious serial killer of our time.
When they paint the image that I was this monster who picked up like these altar boys along the street and swatted them like flies, I said, this is ludicrous.
But the jury didn't find it ludicrous. After barely 2 hours deliberation, its verdict was murder by Gacy, 33 times. 29 bodies buried in that house of his on Summerdale, a crime of horrendous proportions. In the crawl space underneath, bodies covered with lime and encased in plastic, dug up a few days before Christmas and carried into the December cold, one after another after another. But despite all this evidence, he says he has proof he didn't do it. Here's one of dozens of examples of what he calls proof.
I've taken 3.5 hours of truth serum. And under sodium amytal, the maximum amount that I could have, it shows that I have no knowledge of the crime whatsoever. Never have had.
But this is where his attempt to change history, which is what he thinks will get him a new trial, begins to break down. There is no proof anywhere that he ever took truth serum. Now, it's not only a matter of physical evidence, it's a character issue as well. Many times during our interview, he tried to portray himself as a good guy, an ethical, hard-working family man. Here's how he describes himself as a father.
Loving and caring. I've always looked after my children, even now.
What kind of values you remember imparting to them?
The kind of values?
Were you strict with them too?
No, not as strict as, no. A lot of things that my dad did, I refuse to do, because I don't believe in hitting children. I don't believe in spoiling a child either. My values are such that if you give enough love to
You're
children...
accused of murdering 33 kids, and you say you didn't believe in hitting. I mean...
Well, anybody that knows... You see, first of all, you're basing this garbage on what you've heard of me.
And what the jury said, and what the courts of appeal have said. And the prosecutor who put him in jail says Gacy is a ruthless and sadistic killing machine.
He's responsible. He knew exactly what he was doing. He planned it in advance. He carried it out, and he enjoyed it.
Yeah, little John was all that a good person needs to be. A caring husband, a loving father, and a helpful neighbor. I wonder why the world was after him. Why the media was portraying him like some sadistic, cold-blooded monster. Is it because of 29 bodies buried under his house? I would say not, because it is clear that somebody else planted them there. I still can't get over the fact that he actually said that. And you wanna know what is the best part of all this? This interview took place more than a decade later, after he confessed the crime. I mean, this scum even drew a map of all the bodies in the crawl space, and yet he somehow doesn't remember any of that. I'm kinda surprised that he didn't say that correctional officers beat him every day with metal bars and bricks, so he lost his memory because of that. It would actually make a lot more sense than this pathetic try to deny everything he did. This part they will play next probably sickens me the most.
I have a lot of things that I've forgotten that I can't remember. For instance, I can go back to my childhood and stuff and I still remember that, but yet I can go into the 70s and there are a lot of things I can't remember. The same thing with the victims. I've looked at all of, I don't know if you notice here, we got pictures of every one of the victims here. And believe it or not, for the last 12 years, I've studied these photos of the victims. And there is no we have a shot of all of the victims together here. And when you look over at the photos, I have no recollection of any of them. Never met them. And we've gone over this more than once. They're just names and faces. And when you look at them, the thing of it is, we took it a step further. We went into their backgrounds. I wanted to know where they were at, what schools they attended, who they hung out with, and what kind of activities they were into. And that's what we dug up on each one of the victims. But still, there is no association. None of them never worked for me. None of them, they never went to any places that I ever hung around, because I didn't hang around that many places unless you were involved in politics. Or if you were involved in clowning, then I might have ran into you.
I'm pretty sure that lying was deeply engraved in his blood, since he had a great role model in his alcoholic and violent father, who treated him like a piece of garbage from the day he was born. I know we can attribute a large portion of reasons to poor parenting, but in his case that was simply true, although it still doesn't justify even remotely what he did. But having a father like John Sr., who greets you with words like fag, little girl, and trash on daily basis, certainly is not a good pointer in the right direction. And still, Gacy adored him and wanted to do everything to please him. Practically, the only good thing that came from his father was Gacy's name, Wayne, because of the Hollywood legend John Wayne, although I'm not sure how flattering that was for the actor. The good thing about his death, if you can call it that, is that he passed only a year later after Gacy went public, so I guess he can consider himself lucky not to be able to hear all the bullshit Gacy was gonna say in upcoming years. With all that took place in his childhood, no wonder that Gacy was confined in the comfort of his mom's kitchen, which resulted in him being obese and bullied in school. Add constant domestic violence to that pile, and you got yourself a ticking time bomb. So yeah, lying was just a way to keep his daddy a little calmer. And because of that fact, I'm not surprised he even made it in politics. Hell, the man even shook the First Lady's hand. I would say he was natural in it at that point, and he really did have some strong connections, which often raised some questions and red flags about how the justice system often overlooked Gacy and his crimes before he actually started his murders. Many wonder if somebody actually covered up after him. And when you think about it, it doesn't seem quite impossible, since he was sentenced to prison after he sexually assaulted his colleague's 15-year-old son. And from the initial 10 years, Gacy served only 18 months, even becoming some sort of an important fella in prison, being a head cook, that is. But it doesn't end there, and all of this could have been prevented if the police department just weren't a bunch of lazy-ass sleazes. Gacy actually tortured and freed a couple of victims, but when parents went to the police and reported what happened, they received an answer that no parent would want. Police just assumed that the boys were making the stories up, since they ran away from home most of the time, and they didn't even bother checking Gacy's background. It makes me sick just thinking about how many times criminals got away because of incompetent police work. But his victims were not the only ones that were runaways. Not so many people know about his employment in a mortuary when he first ran away from home and was trying to make something for himself. He was actually sleeping there, and like the sick mind he was, he also did some other stuff rather than usual cleaning. And yes, as you guessed, it involved corpses. But when he was asked if he actually crawled up in the coffin to interact with the lifeless bodies, what do you think his answer was? In case you forgot what we are dealing with here, let me refresh your memory.
I went to Las Vegas for 3 months. Took my car and left.
Yeah.
I worked for Palm Mortuary, being the night man picking up bodies at the hospitals and stuff for them. I worked as a night man only. I did have nothing to do with the bodies. All this talk that I slept with the dead ones or had sex with dead bodies, there is no truth to any of that.
You did live in the mortuary.
I lived in the mortuary, yes, but not in the embalming room. I mean, they make it sound like, I slept in the crypts with them. And I never climbed into a coffin or anything like that. That is so damn ridiculous. It's the same thing. The contention is that I slept all night with Robert Peace. If you want to say I slept in the same house with a dead body, okay, fine, I'll buy that. But in the same room, no. And besides, the dead won't bother you. It's the living you got to worry about.
Of course, he didn't do it. How can you even think he was capable of doing something like that? Don't you just hate when people falsely accuse you all the time? This poor man defended himself from all sorts of attacks for more than a decade. Unbelievable. And to think this guy was actually married not once but twice. If that doesn't give hope to every lonely person out there, I honestly don't know what does. I would say that both of his failed marriages didn't have any impact on his personality, because he was oriented on one thing, which unfortunately became his full-time job after the second wife filed for divorce and moved out. The poor woman and her 2 daughters were living with more residents in that horror house than they assumed. This garbage also owned a construction company, and one of the most sickening facts is that he hired some of the victims from that same company to dig up the crawl space, not knowing that they were actually digging their own graves. And so it went on, year after year. He was picking up boys from the streets, taking their lives and piling them under his house like nothing. Timothy McCoy, Daryl Sampson, Michael Marino, William Bundy, Matthew Bowman, and many, many more, for a total of this much bodies. He also took their belongings as trophies and all that, while he presented himself as a good hard-working man who was also entertaining children dressed as a clown. It makes me sick just to think how close in contact he actually was with numerous kids who shook hands with him. The same hands that were responsible for unspeakable acts. So under the cover of a pillar of a local community, he satisfied his sadistic urges for a total of 6 years, until 1978, and the day he screwed up everything. The death of 15-year-old Robert Peace, as tragic as it was the answer to the question of how to catch a homicidal maniac. After offering a boy double the salary that he had in a local pharmacy, he did his thing, and because of the fact there were 29 corpses in the hole already, he threw his body in a nearby river. A river from which he will be recovered later and pointed directly to Gacy's address because of the witnesses that saw him earlier at the pharmacy. The initial warrant was a bit tricky to obtain, however, due to Gacy's thinking that he was untouchable, they managed to get a proper one for a house search, which they previously visited when Gacy invited them to drinks and dinner while they were tracking him. Bold move. Considering the fact you have almost 30 decomposing bodies under the wooden floor. I guess you can say it was kinda an ultimate move for Gacy, chatting with detectives while his double-digit victims were just a couple of feet away. But the joke's on him. When one of the detectives used the bathroom, he sensed, as he said, the smell of death. The second warrant was obtained, and the infamous dark crawl space would finally see the light of day. Of course, like any other lunatic would do, Gacy initially blamed it all on personality disorder, claiming he had no control over what he was doing. But after a psychological assessment, it was clear to everyone that this was just another in the series of lies. During the trial, he actually had one of the best defensive teams because of his political involvement. When he received the death penalty, he allegedly congratulated his team because it was supposedly the outcome he wished for. A funny fact, considering he would spend all of his remaining time doing what he did in that interview. And it's also funny that he genuinely thought that he wasn't going to be stabbed with a needle. Even his lawyer said that he was convinced he had a strong defense case to the very last moment.
I felt things were going to work out because I knew that I didn't do the killing, and I thought it would come out in the trial.
What a nutcase. After 15 years of lying on death row, all his appeals were extinguished, and May 10th, 94 was the date for his execution. Like most of us know, his last words were, "Kiss my ass." Quite frankly, did you expect anything else? After his death, his brain was removed and sent for examining to try to determine what it was that made him do what he did, but nothing was found. To this very day, many experts have doubts as to how to classify Gacy, whether he was a psychopath, a sociopath, a paranoid schizophrenic, or something else. But we can say one thing though, he was one very sick individual.